This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. Being a Southerner, people will say, well, why do you continue to live in the South? Oh, there's any number of reasons. Climate. I love the people. I've had opportunities to live elsewhere. But one of the things that I think kind of anchors, not just myself, but many of us down here, is food. And it's the food that's before you when you're eating, but it's also the fact that so much of our life is tied up in food. I guess many people could say that, but we make a big deal out of just the preparation. We're not big on excluding people from our kitchens while we're preparing things. Being from Louisiana in particular, you're taught from a young age how to cook. And in my opinion, I probably make one of the best gumbos around. I take a lot of pride in my roux. But food is a pathway. It's a pathway to deliver nutrition. It's a pathway to fellowship with those that you love. But many times, it can be a pathway to death. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, unfortunately, you and I, over the past, 14 months, have spent more time than we care to mention at hospitals. And there was a time, and I remember from my childhood, where after church on Sundays, we would go to eat at the hospital in the cafeteria. And it sounds weird, but in our town, the food at the hospital cafeteria was fantastic. But yeah, I know, right? But
that's weird.
It is weird. And I can't say that for all hospitals, but I think hospital food is notorious for being really bad, particularly if you're a patient. And if you're in a room with somebody that you're sitting by their bedside for hours and they're not eating their food, you begin to pick at their tray because, you don't have time to leave and all those sorts of things. And it's absolutely horrible. I don't know of too many ways you can actually improve it, because they tell you they're feeding you the food in order for you to feel better.
Right.
I never really felt better after I ate the food, though.
See, I thought you were going to go with the after church going to the hospital for visitation. I didn't know it was because that was the nice restaurant, Very cool place you grew up.
My family wasn't big on visiting sick.
No. Well, it's interesting how, as you and I were looking at this story, and it brought about other stories that we were talking about, which we will now include into our list of upcoming shows. But today's story of Anjette, is that how you pronounce her name? Anjette Lyles?
Anjette, yeah.
Okay.
Anjette.
I'd never seen that name before.
Yeah.
And anyway, Anjette Lyles is a woman who, born in 1925 into an upper middle class family in Georgia, the Macon area, and grows up normal, or whatever we pass for normal in the South. Yeah. And she's about 22 years old when she meets and marries Ben Lyles. Ben is a World War II veteran. They get married in 1947. And the Lyles family owns a restaurant in downtown Macon, very popular family restaurant. And so Ben is there, and he's now the head. He's in charge of the restaurant. And he's been known to toss a few back, adult beverages, and to gamble a little bit. Now, Anjette and Ben have not been married that long, and I know that back then things were a little different in how we went about getting married and having children, the ages, Now we would look at somebody in their early 20s having children as, wow, they're young, but back then it was not that uncommon. No. And so very early on in the relationship, they have children. Their first daughter is born shortly after they get married, and after she is, I'm guessing, potty trained. Heck, I don't know, but Anjette ends up working in the restaurant with Ben, with her husband. And so they're working together, married a couple of years. And right as Anjette has their second child, Marcia, Ben decides to sell the restaurant. And Ben sells it for below market value and doesn't consult with Anjette before he does that. And the reason he does it is because he's in hock to the Sharks. He's made some bad gambling decisions, apparently. And we're not casting aspersions on the man's character. It's just the reality of what happened, apparently.
Yep.
So Ben sells the family-style restaurant, pays the gambling debt, and Anjette is mad. And so here we go. It is now December 1951. Ben starts to get very, very sick very fast. He ends up in the hospital. Doctors don't know what's going on. Can't figure out why is this man sick. A month or so after he's in the hospital, January 25th, 1952, Ben Lyles dies. Now, Joe, you're a history guy, and I feel confident asking you this. Was it an uncommon occurrence for somebody to die in the hospital in the early 50s and have doctors not be able to figure out what killed them?
I don't know how common it was. I don't think that, and listen, the information we're about to get off into is when you begin to think about the diagnostic testing that we have today compared to what they had back then. And this is what has always fascinated me about the Lyles cases. It doesn't require you to even draw blood or to take urine to run through a toxicology screen. There is symptomology that manifests itself externally on these people's bodies. And so, you look at an individual as a physician, and pretty quickly you begin to kind of try to understand, well, first off, why are they having this gastrointestinal discomfort? Can't keep any food down, and they're having severe diarrhea, terrible abdominal pain. They've got these very nonspecific rashes all over their body. There's change in their pallor, which is a term. It's kind of an old term, but physicians and even pathologists will use it, and it's the color of the skin. They kind of turn like a gray color. You'll have people that are, and talk about historic perspective. There's an old term, and I love this term. They'd say they were addled. Addled means that you're kind of acting like a lunatic, and it's all part of the symptomology of a bigger picture, particularly when you begin to get these in clusters. One person, though, I can see early on, because this man died in the early 50s. And he would only be the first in a succession of deaths.
And you don't know what's coming. So just in an isolated incident, you've got a fairly young man.
Yeah.
And, married, couple of kids, and all of a sudden, very quick illness. I mean, dies in he goes into the hospital in December with this, as you mentioned, a lot of different symptoms, and is dead a month later. It's not a long time to really diagnose what's going on, because in the hospital when you're dealing with this, I mean, we're looking at it with hindsight. Would they be looking at each symptom alone and saying, well, this can bring on this type of gastrointestinal distress, and this can bring on a rash, this can bring on a fever? I mean, is that how they're looking at this then, or are they looking at it in totality?
Yeah, they're trying to, what they're doing is they're checking off a list, and they have a list that, and they kind of cluster these things together, and they'll say, well, he's having these, I think one of the most striking things is probably going to be the skin responses. When you begin to see this blotty rash that comes up, all over people. Sometimes you'll even see changes, in the palms of the hands, that sort of thing. And skin will begin to present with some people that have these presentations on their skin, Dave, in a clinical standpoint, clinical perspective, they'll have to be strapped to the bed so they don't scratch themselves.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, it's a horrific kind of presentation.
Is that something that still goes on now?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'll be very specific here. I don't feel like I'm burying the lead, but we're talking about arsenic, and
Right.
arsenic has been known to man, for, I don't know, 3,000-4,000 years. It's a naturally occurring standalone element. It's on the elemental chart. It's something that has been mined. And as a matter of fact, I think it may have been the Romans that used it to blend it with copper in order to strengthen copper. And because they could mine it in one of their territories, if they came across it. But even back then, Dave, they recognized that the people that were working in the mines were presenting with symptomology, and they would die. And even the Romans, we think of them in a very brutal sense. They shut the mines down. They were like, we've got to find something else in order to blend with copper to make it stronger. And so they walked away from it. And it's been known to be a toxic substance forever. And it's not just in like the Near East or Europe. I'm always fascinated by this because you're taking a long view of this. This stuff is the same thing is happening in the Far East as well. The Chinese knew about it, and they have, the Chinese are very impressive with their written history. It goes back much further, I think, than even Western history in many circumstances as far as how they wrote things down. And they've got examples of arsenic poisoning going back,
Wow.
1,000 years, thousands of years. And so it's been around for a long time. And it's something that has been used in industry over the years, but primarily, arsenic has been used in the most recent sense as a pesticide. Dave, I think that probably if someone wanted to kill somebody in the most stealthy way possible so that they could try to get away with it, poison for many, I think, is at the top of the list. Poisoners are interesting compared to all other killers out there. There was something I read not too long ago talking about the personality of someone that prefers to poison. And one of the lines in it was, they come to you with a smile, but they leave death in their wake. And you never see them coming. And it's the stealth nature of it. The trick, I think, is how do you get access to an individual to apply something that's going to be toxic in their system? And with Anjette Lyles, even though Ben had sold this restaurant, and by the way, Ben's mama worked there as well, in the wake of Ben's death, and Anjette kept working at the restaurant. And by all accounts, she was a real floor show, if you will. She's kind of bombastic.
Yeah.
And
got a big personality and likes to flirt.
Big personality, likes to flirt. She's got platinum blonde hair. Think of kind of a heavier set Marilyn Monroe. How the women would kind of, I think they called it bobbing their hair, and it was short, but it was like when you saw her, it was striking. She was a striking, and they talked about her where she would warmly greet everybody that came into the restaurant, throw her arms around them and hug them and sit and just engage with people. What's really fascinating about the Lyles restaurant, Dave, is that if you ever go to Macon's kind of an interesting little town. I'm a fan of it because of Otis Redding and the Allman Brothers. But Macon in and of itself, aside from its musical heritage, it's an interesting little town that's tried to rebound several times. But going down the main street, and literally the main street is the name of one of my favorite Dr. Seuss books when I was little, is Mulberry Street. I think the name of the book it was called I Can't Believe It, or It Happened on Mulberry Street or something like that. But on Mulberry Street sat the Lyles restaurant, and take a guess where it was positioned across the street from.
No clue.
The county courthouse. So back then,
wow.
During the 50s, there was no such thing as drive-through food. McDonald's was at some point in time was just starting up in some place that was far, far away from Macon, Georgia. So if you were going to go out to eat, and back then going out to eat was a big deal.
Yeah.
Across the street from the courthouse, when they'd go on break, the judges, the lawyers, probably even defendants would come in to Anjette's restaurant, and they would eat. And we've got a couple of these places around where we live, Dave. They're generally
the Courthouse Cafe.
Yeah, they're called. What's the term? I'm probably going to get meat and three. I think that's what it's called. Where you get a meat of some kind, whether it's cube steak, country fried steak, mashed potatoes, lima beans, and black-eyed peas or collards or something like that. So you get one big hunk of fried protein, and then you get vegetables along with it. And these are still prevalent around these parts. I can't speak to the rest of the country,
and I still put those vegetables on the side of my plate next to the napkin so nobody can see I didn't eat them. Hate those things. But, you mentioned that Anjette continued working, at the restaurant after Ben's passing. And she's there with her mother-in-law. And by the way, remember now, her mother-in-law, Julia Lyles, Ben's mom, well, that's the grandmother to Anjette's little girls, so there's a real connection here. Now, Anjette, after the death of Ben, Anjette moves in with her parents for a couple of years while she continues working and saving her money. Now, remember, Ben sold the restaurant and sold it for under market value. Anjette was very clever in that she saved money and learned all she could about the restaurant business. And after a couple of years, she buys it back. Anjette buys back this. This is not a common thing to have happen with women in the South in the 50s. This is not your normal thing. And she's very cagey in that as soon as she does, the first thing, she hires back Ben's mom, her mother-in-law, Julia, because she wanted to attract some of the old Lyles restaurant crowd that remembered Julia. So she brings her back, and there they are. Now, Anjette and Julia working together in the restaurant, and everything's going fine. People really like her. You mentioned that she's got that big personality, always hugging people when they come in and saying hello. And after Anjette is in control of the restaurant, she meets a guy named Buddy Gabbert. Now, Buddy was a pilot, and he'd been going there for a while to the restaurant, and he and Anjette strike up a friendship and end up, I guess, casually dating. I'm sure she was very busy with work and the girls, but she announces, Anjette does, they're going on vacation. She and Buddy are going to take a vacation. And when she comes back.
Wait, hang on. Back during that time, too, she's not married to him. This would have been very scandalous, by the way.
I was going to ask you how you thought that played out, you know? Because I didn't want to blow past it, but I thought, am I the one thinking it's a big deal?
No,
how did they
back
position
in the 50s,
this?
They're not married. They're going
Okay.
I can tell you the Board of Deacons is going to be talking about this.
Well, they go on this vacation, and I can hear the preamble is, well, we've got separate hotel rooms and separate but we're going together. But anyway, you look at it, when they came back from vacation, they announced, hey, we got married. So now Buddy and Anjette are married. So here we are. We're now in 1955. Now, remember, her husband, Ben, sold the restaurant to settle a gambling debt in 1951. He then dies after a month-long illness between December and January in 1952. So we're a couple of years down the road. She's bought the restaurant back, and her mother-in-law works there with her. She gets married to Buddy Gabbert. Well, that's in July of 1955 when they go on vacation and return married. A couple of months later, October 1955, Buddy has minor surgery. Oh, I need to add this. Buddy is a pilot, and he's gone a lot. He travels a lot. And so there were some rumors flying around town about Anjette and her flirty personality. Okay, I'll leave it at that. You guys fill in the blanks. Buddy comes back, and he has his minor surgery in October. And when he goes home to convalesce after the surgery, he develops a fever and then a rash that covers his entire body, Joe. This is October 1955, and doctors, they can't figure out what's going on. I'm going to ask you a very specific question.
Sure.
In 1955, what would they have been testing for with those types of symptoms? Fever and rash.
Fever and rash. Back then, they would have thought, the first thing they would have thought about is probably exposure to something. Something that is going to present with, I don't know, for lack of a better term, some kind of dermatitis. Okay. Now, the trick is to try to understand, is this something like most people have heard of there's a term called contact dermatitis. Like if you touch something, with, your hand, or you brush up against something, you'll get kind of a focal area of your body that will be impacted by whatever agent it is you've come in contact with. And sometimes it can spread. That's the first thing, because I still, this is a pearlism. My grandmother, one of her favorite things to say back then is if you had a rash, or, you would, there was something going on with you, she'd say, boy, what have you gotten into? And, and so that's one of the things, you're kind of thinking about here as from a diagnostic standpoint, but you have to account for the fever. All right. Just because you have a contact dermatitis doesn't mean that you're going to be presenting, in a febrile state. It's not going to, those two things don't match up. So then you turn to, well, is this some kind of internal thing that's going on, and it's manifesting externally? Now, along with this, if I'm not mistaken, he again, like his predecessor, the first husband, had horrible gastrointestinal discomfort. And they would have diagnosed it as gastroenteritis back then. And again, it's very kind of non-specific.
Right.
A lot of the symptomology with this is non-specific. But when you're maintaining in that state, and you're declining, and they're hanging IVs on you, and they've got everybody and their brother coming in to take a look at you, it's not surprising that they would miss common signs that might be associated with arson.
Well, they're not thinking that, right? I mean, you're not thinking.
Nobody's thinking that. It's always. I try to cut medical staff a lot of slack,
right?
Because there are people that present at hospitals all the time, and they will suddenly die.
Right.
Clinicians are not clinicians are not looking at a patient and thinking with a forensic mind. They're thinking with a clinician's mind, with a healer's mind. What do I have to do to get this person from point A to point B? And so they're going down a checklist. Trust me, arsenic is not popping up on the radar. That's just not something that you think. It's the old adage about, you might have that one person that when they hear hoofbeats, they think camel as opposed to horses, but they're an outlier to say the very least from a diagnostic standpoint. One of the interesting things about Anjette is that she made a fuss over everybody in her family that gets sick. And when you kind of dig into the mind of someone that might be poisoning someone, you want to get that kind of, and particularly if you're going for the sympathy vote, oh, look at her. They just have gotten married. They're just starting their life. She's a widow. She's got these 2 little girls that lost their daddy. She's taking care of her former husband's mother-in-law. What this lady is, she's going to be declared a saint.
Right.
And so every day when any of these family members wind up presenting with any kind of symptomology, she's there. She's there at their bedside, Dave. Now, when you put that in perspective, that's chilling, because at the end of the day, having Anjette Lyles adjacent to your bedside was kind of the equivalent of having the specter of death with their scythe hanging over their shoulder sitting there. When you read the Bible, there's one individual in the Bible that always comes to mind when you're going through hard times, and that's Job. You don't want to sit there and say, I'm just like Job. Nobody can be just like Job. You would not wish that. Well, I don't know. Some folks might wish that on their worst enemy. I wouldn't. When you think about, and it's part of our vernacular, we say I'm going through the trials of Job. A lot of people don't understand that, but when you're surrounded by family members that are dying left and right, and you're still trying to struggle, I think spiritual standpoint, many folks will look up to the heavens and shake their fist and say, why are you allowing this to happen to me? That wasn't the case with Anjette Lyles, though. She continued to sally forth, Dave, and put on the face of being a strong, independent woman, running the restaurant, taking care of her family. And now you've got a second husband that's 1 foot in the grave and 1 foot on a banana peel.
Well, it's interesting that as we look at this, it's a very condensed period of time, from getting married in 1947 to having children, the restaurant, selling the restaurant, husband dies. I mean, there's a lot going on in this woman's life in a very, very short window of time. And I think about those 2 girls being raised in that environment of what it must have been like. But after the death, y'all know that. I mean, obviously, Buddy dies after a very brief illness. Now, he had that surgery in October of 1955, and he's home convalescing by the end of the month. So he's sick in November. And on December 2nd, Buddy dies. So he's got a 5 or 6 week recovery period in death. So
and let me just interject too. Buddy's death was miserable. It was miserable. And you remember Dave, how I was saying a second ago, being tied to the bed?
Yeah.
That in his particular instance, they had to restrain his arms. Can you imagine?
Because of the rash?
Yeah. And, it's bad enough, if if you've got stomach discomfort, which he would have had tremendous stomach discomfort coming out, as they say, coming out of both ends, anything that you ingest, you would, and plus you're itching all over your body. What a horrible way. And this misery lasted for this particular period of time. But my understanding that Anjette was the one constant in this universe. She was always coming to take care of him. And as kind of a portent of things to come, Buddy didn't eat hospital food. He ate food from the restaurant.
Right. Well, 90 days after they get married, think about that, Joe. You're talking about they go on a vacation and come back married in July. And 90 days later, Buddy, has this minor surgery that turns into death by December 2nd. That is a whirlwind of highs and lows. So after Buddy's death, Anjette changes her name back to Lyles. That was kind of interesting to me. It really did make me wonder. Well, any way you look at it, she did it. And she also collected some insurance money.
Yes,
and in a town the size of Macon, when you're running a restaurant in downtown where you meet everybody and talk to everybody, well, Anjette bought herself a brand new Cadillac and bought a new house and moved her mother-in-law, Julia, into the home with her to help take care of the girls. Saint. Yes. Look at this woman. She's taking care of everybody. And now Julia, the grandma, gets to be there to help take care of the children. This is what we just need to go ahead and make a statue of Anjette right now and put it downtown and,
on Mulberry Street.
Yeah, right there. And well, the thing is that after Julia, the mother-in-law, moves in with Anjette, they didn't get along. And I'm thinking now, here we are. It's a much different time than it was in the 1950s. Not getting along with your mother-in-law seems like there could be a fix, move her out. But she doesn't. Instead of trying to rectify the situation, Anjette tries to get Julia to write out a new will. You need a will, Julia. You need a will. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, Joe. Somebody who's got a couple of dead people in their recent past is telling you to get a will.
Yeah.
I'm thinking there's got to be an apartment somewhere I can rent, But,
or maybe you have a pause and say, wow, Anjette's really proactive. It all depends on how you look at it.
Right. Wow. Well, there was also, there were a couple of things being talked about Anjette at the hospital, at the restaurant. The workers said that, they were a little weirded out by her, some black magic voodoo type stuff. And in a town the size of Macon, Georgia, if you're talking to black candles when you think nobody's looking, that's going to get around. It
will. And let me tell you one more thing about that. The employees, and this really plays a big part in this. The employees at this restaurant that work behind the counter were all African American. Okay. So generationally, better than, let's say, the white folks out there, they understood kind of this ominous thing that's going on with her and black candles, because they've seen it. They talk about it. It's not something that the white community necessarily talks about. In the African American community, though, this is something that's real. And I experienced this in New Orleans, because down there you actually do have a voodoo culture that is real.
Wow.
It doesn't matter if you believe in it or not. They believe in it. You also have Santeria as well. And a lot of the stuff comes up out of the Caribbean. It goes back generations, even, during the slave era and this sort of thing, when things are brought over and practiced. All you have to do is just go to the east of Macon and wind up in Savannah and Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. And, voodoo played a large part in that case. And someday we're going to cover that case.
It actually had something to do with the Salem witch trial. The Salem witch trials had Tituba.
Yeah, exactly. And she was from the islands, I think, is the way they referred to her as, and she was a servant.
Wow.
So, if you're an African American and it's in the 50s in the deep South, because you are in the deep South and you are dependent upon the white folks to provide your living, you're going to keep your mouth shut because you never know how it's going to wind up for you.
Right.
You know, you're going to be out on the bricks and you're not going to have a job anymore. But can you imagine you're sitting there and this woman, this bombastic woman with the blonde hair who's driving a caddy, is in the back room, and she's got a black candle and she lights it, and they'll see her whispering to the candle. And that's enough to terrify anybody. And let me tell you one more thing. They have proof in their eyes because she's driving a big white Cadillac through town. You might not know this, Dave, about Macon, but Macon, Georgia, the main industry in Macon, Georgia back then were textile mills and cotton. And so people that lived in Macon, you had very few people that were really wealthy. Most people, if they had a car, would come to town and they would be driving an old truck or an old beat up car. You've got this bombastic woman with stark white hair that's riding around in a caddy. She's going to draw attention. The people that knew about kind of the voodoo element here that are watching her, can you imagine? It's real easy to put two and two together. You think that because of her whispering to the candle, because of her involvement in this, she's now experiencing wealth. She's able to, this is a woman in the 50s that is recovering from the loss of a husband, two husbands, and all of a sudden these great riches fall into her lap. Well, you know, to me, this is like being at the crossroads in Mississippi and somebody signed a deal with the devil.
Wow. I actually did look up Little Richard Penniman, came from Macon, Georgia, and worked at a restaurant and nightclub there. It was called TikToks, I think, or Tic Tac. But anyway, I was in my back of my head when you were talking about how Anjette actually had employed African Americans. You know, I thought, well, I wonder if Little Richard was there. You know, he wasn't, but I was looking it up just in case. But Joe, after the death of her second husband and moving in her mother-in-law, Julia, into her home, they don't get along. And all of a sudden, Julia becomes sick. It's now 1957. She went, Anjette did, the entire year of 1956 without anyone close to her dying that we're aware of. And I'm sure she, was celebrating, oh, bad times are over. Well, maybe that's what people thought. Because in 1957, Julia becomes ill. She's hospitalized and dies September 29th. And nobody knows why. Don't know what happened. She got sick and died. Holy moly. So, Joe, as they're doing what they had done previously, doctors, I mean, you've got to think at some point somebody's going to look at this and go, hey, man, we got 3 adults dead in a 5-6 year period of time. What's the common denominator? I mean, is nobody looking at this? Well, they did when Marcia got sick. Little Marcia is 9 years old. It's March 1958, and Anjette's daughter gets sick in the restaurant. It is so sad. She's hospitalized with hallucinations and her kidneys shutting down.
Yep, you're right.
What does that tell a doctor at that point in time, Joe?
Well, it didn't tell them arsenic for whatever reason. I can't understand, I think, from when, and again, you don't know how many of these physicians had the history to rely upon too. We're kind of looking at this in our rearview mirror. So you've got this succession of husbands, you've got a mother-in-law. Was it the same clinical staff that had treated the other people to put 2 and 2 together? The one central figure, though, Dave, in this that I still cannot wrap my brain around is the coroner. Mm-hmm. How could the coroner make a determination? Because they did what they used to refer to as a coroner's inquest.
What actually is that? I've heard the term used many times. What
it's
does that
kind
mean?
of a formalized term to mean that the coroner is doing an investigation.
Okay.
I think that it's kind of a media thing that they used to do. Oh, the coroner's involved. Well,
Okay.
yeah, anybody that dies, particularly acutely, there's going to be an inquest by the coroner. But, coroners also, many people don't understand this, they can impanel a coroner's jury. They actually impaneled a coroner's jury with Bonnie and Clyde. Yeah, I know, right?
Didn't know that.
For those that didn't know that, I just saw the expression on Dave's
Yeah.
face. And you have a jury of people that are impaneled because coroner does have judicial authority. And so going back, that's another story for another time. They're very powerful. People really don't understand that. Next to the sheriff. Matter of fact, in many places, if the sheriff is removed from office, the coroner replaces the sheriff.
You know what? Quick funny story. Alabama. Several years ago in Walker County, Alabama, home city of Jasper. You know how we get those calls that come in, scam calls, and where there was a scam for a while where somebody would call you and say, you've got a warrant for your arrest and you have to pay $500 or whatever and do it right now, or we're knocking on your door. We're coming to get you. If you don't do it right now, we're going to arrest you. And the flim-flammers actually made the mistake of calling the county sheriff, the Walker County sheriff. And he gets on the phone and he says, well, I'll tell you what, son, go ahead and pick up the county coroner because he's the only one that can arrest me.
Yep. That's right. Yeah. I don't, again, going far afield, in New Orleans, the sheriff who has to be served with papers cannot serve themselves. Coroner investigator would go over and serve the sheriff papers.
Wow.
In civil things and all that sort of thing. So,
wow.
Yeah. But the one common denominator is that the Bibb County coroner, because this is Macon is located in Bibb County, Georgia. Okay. One famous person we know in common that is from Bibb County is Nancy Grace, by the way.
Yeah.
And so he would rule these that it was just some kind of non-specific natural disease that had gotten them. And I think like gastroenteritis was at the top of the list, throughout all of this. And I think back to the husband, the second husband being tied to the bed. And I'm thinking, dude, how can you look at this and not want to delve further? If for no other reason, not necessarily you're thinking homicide, you're thinking, my God, is this guy a public health risk? Because I'm thinking if he's exposed to something and I'm a servant of the people, I don't want everybody else to be, exposed to this as well. And then you have the mother-in-law that dies again pretty quickly. And one of the things with arsenic, Dave, is that it screws up the rhythm of your heart as well. And so you've got someone like Julia, who's in advanced age by this point in time. It's not necessarily surprising that she died. If she is exposed to arsenic, then in her world, her death might happen relatively quicker because she's already compromised physically, just simply based on age. Mm-hmm. Okay. But when you get to Marcia and this precious little girl, how do you actually explain that, man?
Well, it was actually an anonymous letter. They didn't have it explained. They didn't have an answer. All the medical people, I'm sure, were talking about it, but it actually came down to an anonymous letter from an employee of the restaurant that actually had his or her fill and actually sent a letter to the coroner. And in that letter, the employee noted that Anjette kept poison at the restaurant. Not uncommon to have ant poison in a restaurant. However, there's arsenic in this ant poison.
Taro ant poisoning.
Yep. And so that was what the employee wrote to the coroner, and the coroner then went, "Hey, wait a minute. Now, would that be like?" And I'm not knocking anyone. I don't know what it would take. I mean, to come to that conclusion independently, but at that point, it was the anonymous letter that actually went ding, ding, ding. Light is on.
Yeah. Well, you begin to string these together, and here's another little insight and I kind of mentioned this earlier, the person that wrote this letter was an African American lady that worked in the restaurant. She didn't sign her name to it. And here's why. Because if she had, then they would have dismissed her, because she's an African American lady in the 1950s making these accusations toward a prominent white lady. And so this is a brilliant move on the part. I can only imagine how terrified she was, because she's borne witness to the Black Candle thing. She's actually knows that the she understands the kind of the timeline here. She's borne witness to all of these people dying. You begin to think about those kids too. It's not one of my favorite restaurants that was actually here in Jacksonville. It's no longer open. It was owned by a Greek family, and it had been around for years and years. It was on the square in Jacksonville, and it was a pizza joint, but they also served meat and three. The thing that was so charming to me about the restaurant is that they brought all of their children to work with them. They even had playpens in there with toys. It didn't bother me at all. As a matter of fact, it was kind of endearing. The grandmother was always in the restaurant, and she was speaking in Greek. And they were just really sweet people. I miss that restaurant. They're always there. They're part of the fabric of this environment. So these kitchen workers would have seen those two little girls in this environment. They get out of school, they come to the restaurant. Julia is there in the restaurant every single day. So they have a different perspective than somebody that's just kind of coming and going, even if the coroner, which he probably did, had come in to eat meals there. And Dave, what this led to was they had to get orders of exhumation and go back and disinter these bodies. And
now, that's not an easy thing to do, is it?
No, it's not. Yeah, and judges are notorious for not wanting to crack open graves. It is, if you've never been involved in it, folks, it is you're moving heaven and hell in order to convince this judge that is in the community's best interest and the legal system's best interest to crack open a grave and take out a body. First off, most people that are not around the dead like I am, they find it abhorrent. Okay, and it's something that's not done. You think about going back in time. You think about Tammy Daybell. They had to have her exhumed, and we've had a number of cases like these. But Dave, the thing about it is, with arsenic poisoning, the one thing that you look for in arsenic poisoning is you're going to do sampling from multiple locations in the body. Even after a body has been embalmed, you can still pick up on it because it's a heavy metal. It will actually go into, you'll find it in the hair, you'll find it in the nails. And one of the
I was going to ask you about the fingernail test.
Yeah. And so you look at the nails themselves develop these weird kind of horizontal lines on them that, and if you're a clinician, you don't think about that. I've been in the hospital a couple of times in my life. I don't ever remember a physician or a nurse saying, "Let me see your fingernails." It's just like, well, here, doc, look at my fingernails. It's not something they commonly do. But Dave, as a result of the exhumation, they were able to go to Anjette's home. And not only did they have this, and it's called taro ant poisoning. The company's still in existence today. Back then, they were putting arsenic in the ant poisoning. And for 50 years now, arsenic is forbidden. But back then, it was everywhere, Dave. It was everywhere. It was part of pest control. You had rats in the barn, you put out arsenic. You had ants, you just sprinkle the taro around. They come and eat it, you put a little sugar with it, and you got dead ants at this point in time. And so they went to her home. Not only did they find more of the ant poison at home, guess what else they found? Well, they found all kinds of objects connected with voodoo there as well. inside of her home. The way this case kind of spun out was a real show in the courtroom. Dave, you had multiple people in this case because of Lyles Restaurant that had to recuse themselves because they knew Anjette.
Wow.
They knew her, and they couldn't involve themselves in the case. And can you imagine? I mean, the sheriff ate regularly there.
Wow.
The DA ate regularly there. The judges, one of whom was distantly related to Anjette, had to recuse himself. He was a state district judge, said, I can't be a part of this because she's kin to me, Dave.
Right. That's just unbelievable. But when everything is said and done, Joe, I'm still shocked that Marcia, at 9 years old, was dead. And a month after that, it took a month, and this is kind of quick in my book, because after Marcia's passing, the anonymous letter arrives, they get the exhumation, and when Anjette is actually in the hospital being treated for varicose veins, which I don't know what they did back then to treat varicose veins, but she was in the hospital for that, and that's where they arrested her. They arrested Anjette at the hospital and charged her with murder. And
I think she made one of her initial court appearances in a wheelchair.
Did she?
You talk about trying to get the sympathy vote here.
Yeah.
But here's what's fascinating, Dave. Anjette was actually tried by a jury of her peers, and she was found guilty. She had the death penalty imposed upon her. And I think back to those workers in that restaurant. If one of them had committed a crime like this, and I'm thinking one of these African-American women that worked there, the local constabulary, the judicial system, and the governor himself would not have given it a second thought of putting them on death row. But the governor famously said that he's not going to be a part of a white woman being executed. Because I got to tell you, regardless of how you feel about the death penalty, she deserved it. I mean, when you think about the pain and suffering that people went through and the exposure as well, can you imagine the chill that would go up and down your spine? You're thinking, I ate there on a regular basis. This woman is poisoning the food. She's taken it to the hospital to continue the poisoning. How many other people were exposed? Well, in her world, she winds up going to prison. And at some point in time, Dave, and this is fascinating, they declare her to be insane. And Georgia had this infamous hospital for the criminally insane that was located in Milledgeville. And Milledgeville, Georgia, is like the main industry there used to be prisons. There were multiple prisons in the town. And they had this place that was notorious to treat the criminally insane. As a matter of fact, when we were kids, a slur that you could direct at somebody as a child would be, man, you need to be in Milledgeville. And you just kind of understood that. In Louisiana, it was, you need to be in Jackson. And so those things creep up. But Anjette wound up dying in this place in Milledgeville, Georgia in 1977. Interestingly enough, the last prison job she had, she worked in the kitchen. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.